Hey everybody! In this series of videos, I'm going to show you 10 features you need to know when working in Adobe Illustrator. Feature number 3, working with the Layers palette. So when you open a new document in Adobe Illustrator, it creates a layer. I'm going to pull this Layers palette out where we can see it a little better. When you start placing objects on your page, it'll place them all on the first layer. And after a while, you can get so many objects on the page that it just becomes a mess. So normally what I'll do is I'll create a separate layer for each object on the page, and that makes it a lot easier to select the item and manipulate it later on. So let's just change all these to different colors. Now you can see we have all these objects created on the same layer. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create some new layers, and we'll just drag all those below the first layer. We'll click on this yellow, drag that to the second layer, blue to the third layer, and then pink to the last layer. Now each of these objects is on a layer of its own, and we can turn those layers off, turn them back on. If you want one of these layers to always be there and not move, we can click the little lock and lock it, so that way we can't select it and move it. We can still move the others, we just can't move that one locked layer. On this pink layer, we'll create a couple of extra copies, and we'll change the colors on those too. So now just by looking at this, you don't really know what object is on which layer. So what we can do is we can select the layer, layer 4, and we can click this little circle, and it'll select everything that's on that layer and only what's on that last layer. So if we wanted to, we could name these layers. Double click on here and change the name, or if you double click on the image, it'll bring up a window where you can change the options. You can change the color of the layer here with this, here, blue, and then this one we can name it multiple. And then if we wanted to, we could just drag these around to change the order of the different layers. Also in the layers palette, to create a new layer, we'll just click here on the create a new layer button. If we want to delete that layer, just highlight it, hit the trash can. If we have a layer, we can click this button to create a sublayer, and that'll create a layer inside of the layer. If you did want to use sublayers, a way you could use that, for example, would be if you're making a business card and you could build that whole business card on one layer, and you could name that, here, let's just do a new layer. We'll just do a new layer here, and we'll call that business card 1, and we could just put our background image there, and then we could just build sublayers off of that. So we've got the rectangle as our background. Then this layer could be our top layer. And then we could add another layer inside of there, and we could call that logo, and we could just bring in our logo. And you can see we could just create our whole business card inside this one layer using all these sublayers. And then if you had another business card, you could create a new master layer here, drag that down, and we could create a new shape for our new business card. Now we got business card 2. And then we could just create sublayers underneath there. This would be the background again. And then again we could create our text layer, and we could create a logo layer, And we could build a whole nother layer for business card 2. And then that way we could have everything for business card 1 in here, everything for business card 2 in here. And that way you could keep it all separated, and you could just turn these off and on to display the different business cards in the file. So another thing, I'm going to delete those two. Delete, drag this one back to the top. Okay, so now let's talk about the options here in the flyout menu. We can click here and we can create a new layer from here and name it. We can click on a layer and we can create a sublayer from here. We could click the flyout menu. We could duplicate the layer. So now we have yellow layer and yellow copy layer. We could click the menu and delete the yellow layer. We could click the flyout menu, bring up the options panel for the blue layer. We could change the color of the layer. We could choose whether to show it or preview it or print it. If you don't want to print this layer, you could click this. In that way, it'd make it a non-printable layer. We could also, we'll do the clipping mask one here in a minute. We can enter isolation mode, which dims everything else out, and you only work on this one layer. So anything you do over here doesn't affect anything. Only when you click here, it'll only affect this one layer. And to get out of isolation mode, you can click here and exit isolation mode, or you can just double click here on the screen and it'll take you out of isolation mode. The next thing is we can come down and flatten the artwork. So the next thing is we're going to do the collect in a new layer. If you click on one layer and hold down Shift and click the last one, it'll select all the layers. If you click on a layer and hold down Command, then you can just select individual layers and not have to select every layer. You can also click down here and drag up to select the layers. So if we want to combine some of these layers, we could pick the black layer and we'll pick the yellow layer by holding down the Command key. Then we can come here to the flyout menu, collect in a new layer. We click that and it combines both of those objects into a new layer, and it gets rid of the two old layers. So the next thing we're going to talk about is template, and I'm just going to scoot these over for a minute. I'm going to bring in a photograph of this watch. Whoa, that's ginormous. And we'll create a new layer, and we'll just move that to the new layer, put that on the bottom, and I'm just going to turn the rest of these layers off for now. So if we bring in a photograph or an image or a logo or something that you want to draw or trace in Illustrator, you can bring that in. You can come here to the menu and choose template, and I'll show you what that does. We'll double click here. What that does is it turns on template mode, and then it dims your image by 50%. And if that's still too bright for you, then you can click here and you can adjust this, maybe down to 30 or something, and that'll just dim it a little more. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, so the next thing in the flyout menu is show all layers. So if we click that, then it'll bring all the layers back up. The next thing is if we have one layer selected, we can click here and say hide others, and it'll turn off every layer except for the one we have selected. Another thing is if you have one layer selected, you can say outline others, which pretty much turns all the rest of your layers into like a wireframe mode. And then to turn that off, we go back to preview all layers. And then the next thing is if we have a layer selected, we can come up here and select lock others, and that'll lock every layer except for the one we're working on. You can click here to unlock all the layers. And now if we come back to the flyout menu, we'll go to paste remembers layers. So if we turn that off and it's not checked, so it's turned off, and we select everything on our page and we do Command X to cut everything, now all of our layers are empty here in the layers palette. So now if we come back and do edit, paste in place, what that does is paste every object back into one single layer. So all of our objects and our photograph are all on the same layer. All the rest of these layers are empty. So with paste remembers layers turned off, if you copy everything and paste it back in, it pastes it all into one layer. If we turn this back on, you'll see now it has a check mark beside it. If we select everything in our document and we Command X to cut everything, you'll see all of our layers are blank again. But this time when we do edit, paste in place, it pastes everything back to the layer that it came from. Also, if you do a Command C to copy everything, and you come over here and you create a new document. You have one layer. Now if we come over here and do Edit, Paste in Place, it'll create a layer for each one of those objects to match the layers in the document that we copied this from. Alright, so we'll close that document. Come back to our original one here. Alright, so I'm going to delete all of these objects. I'm going to delete all these layers except for the one with the photograph on it. And I'm going to show you one last thing. If we have this photograph and we want to trim this out and knock all the background out and just be able to see the watch, what we can do is we can lock that layer, create a new layer on top. We'll come over here and get our pen tool, no fill, no stroke. Now what we'll do, I'm just going to do this real quick. We'll just make a path around this watch with our pen tool. This is not going to be perfect because I'm just trying to do it quick just to show you. Alright, so we have our path drawn, and I'm going to give that a stroke just so we can see it there. If I was going to use this as a real clipping path, then I would go back in here and make sure all this was perfect before I created my mask. Alright, that'll work for now. Okay, so we have our image, we have our clipping path. We can select both of these. Actually, we'll have to unlock this photo layer first. Then we could select both of these, come up to Object, come down to Clipping Mask and Make, and then that would knock out the background and just leave our watch. But you can also do the same thing in the Layers palette. Come to Object, Clipping Mask and Release. And now what we'll do is we'll use the Layers palette, and we're going to use this icon here, Make and Release a Clipping Mask. So we have the outline that we drew, and we have our photograph. And if we select both of these, come down here to Clipping Mask, click that to make the mask, and it didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work is because the photo and the line are both on different layers. So what we'll have to do is put both of those on the same layer. So we'll select them both. We'll click on the clipping path. We'll drag that down to where the photo is. Now we'll select both of them and we'll hit this little button again, and now it creates a clipping path because the path and the photo are both on the same layer. And if you click just the picture and move it, the mask will stay there, and you can move the picture around inside the mask. To move the clipping path and the picture, you'll have to click and drag and select both of them, and then when you move this, it moves the path along with the picture. And if you come up here to Object and Group, then you can just click on this, and then they'll both move together because you have them grouped together. And then one last little thing, you see in the corner of this layer that there's a little triangle here. That just indicates the layer that you're currently working on. So if we click on this layer, then that becomes the active layer. Even if we click down here and we can't see it highlighted, then we still know that that's the active layer. Same with this watch. We could click on the watch over here, and that's going to show it's the active layer. This little blue dot means that there's an object that's selected on the page. If we click off of that object, that little blue button goes away, but the little triangle still shows that's the active layer. So if we drew another object on this page, then it would draw it on that same layer because that was the active layer, even though we didn't have anything selected. Okay, so I know I said one last thing before, but I have a couple of extra things I almost forgot to mention. Let's say you have all three of these objects on one layer, and you want to put each of these objects on their own layer. All you have to do is select the layer, come to the little flyout menu, and click Release to Layers. It'll put each object on its own layer, and it'll make them a sub-layer of the original layer. But if you want them all to be on their own master layers, you can select them all. You can drag them over here to the left and let go, and that'll move them over to a master layer position. So they're not tied to this first layer anymore. All right, let's undo that. Now we have everything on one layer again. We'll select that layer, click the flyout menu, and we'll say Release Layers, Build. And when we do that, it places them on layers in the order that we made the objects. So we made the blue object first, so it puts it on a layer by itself. We made the pink object second, so it puts the blue and the pink on the second layer. And we made the orange object third, so it puts the orange, pink, and the blue on a layer. So it creates a layer for each step of the build that we did. All right, so let's undo that. Now we'll go back to our layer 1. Actually, let's add a couple more objects to this page. We'll change the colors on those. So now we have 5 objects on this page. And if we click on the layer, again, we can click the flyout menu. We'll go to Release to Layers Sequence. So now each one of these objects is on a sublayer by itself. We'll grab those. We'll pull them over here to the left and let go. And it brings them all over as master layers. And let's say we have these objects on top of each other. Let's say we want to switch the order of the light blue and the yellow layers. What we can do is we can click on the blue layer, Command click on the yellow layer to select those two. Come over to the flyout menu, we'll click on Reverse Order, and it'll change the position of those two layers in our layers palette. And you can select 2 or more layers and it'll switch them. If we select all of them and click Reverse Order, then it'll just flip them all. So instead of it going from blue to yellow, now it goes from yellow to blue. Now, hopefully for the last time in this video, I'm going to say this is the very last tip in this video. We know that if we want to create a new layer, we can click the new layer icon here and create a new layer. Let's undo that. But if we want to, say, duplicate this pink layer, we can click on it, come to the flyout menu and say Duplicate Layer 5. Or we can click on it, grab that layer, drag it down here to the new layer icon, let go, and that will also make a copy of the layer. But then you realize you don't need that extra copy of layer 5, so you can click it, drag it to the trash, and delete it. If you need to make a copy of several layers, you can command click those layers, drag those to the new layer icon, and it'll make a copy. If you don't need them, select them all, drag them to the trash, and that's it. So I guess that's about it for now. Be sure to check out the remaining videos in this series on the other 9 features you need to know when working in Adobe Illustrator. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you liked this video and would like to see more, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.